Hello everyone, this is Lala, and today I'm back with my second video of the Big Brother and Sexuality video series that I am doing now. And today's video is about gay women slash lesbians in Big Brother USA. If you want to watch my first video which discusses Big Brother USA and gay men, you can watch it right above. There it is. So, what is immediately noticeable to me when I saw the list of lesbian women compared to gay men on Big Brother is that there are a lot less lesbians than there are of gay men during the 23 to 24 year history that the show has been on. So it is clear that casting and or the network prioritized gay men over lesbian women, which is unfortunate. And that dichotomy within the gay community, or the gay communities, showing more preference and visibility towards the men than the women are very visible here. So, like the last video and the videos I've discussed regarding race slash ethnicity pertaining people in that group's experiences in Big Brother US or Big Brother Canada, which you can look at above, I'm going to talk about all the women in chronological order and talk about things that I noted about their experiences on Big Brother and whether their sexuality had any sort of impact or effect on it. So, here we go. So the first person we are going to talk about is Ivette from Big Brother 6. I find it interesting that they had a gay man in Big Brother 2, 3, and 5, but it took them over 5 years to have their first lesbian to be on the season with Ivette. I mentioned with the early era gay men that there is in general always a quote-unquote coming out moment that is shown on the episodes, and that is no different with Ivette here, where I believe she came out to April and it was a very nice moment, especially with how their relationship or their interactions would change throughout the season. When I really think about it, I don't think her sexuality had a huge part in her journey on Big Brother. Like I mentioned, I do think her ethnic makeup played a much larger role, which is what she contributed to as well, as she would use her being Latin as an excuse for her behavior. But you could say that her sexuality also might have been a reason as to why she came off as a bit more aggressive than her allies, and most of the women on the season as well, or why people perceived her differently than a lot of the others. This is another example of intersectionality, where your ethnicity slash race, as well as your sexuality, causes a different experience and a different perception as well, compared to someone who fits one of those identities but has a difference between them and her. I also think that due to the twist of the season, where everyone entered the season with a real life partner, made her experience very different, where she came in with Beau, who is a gay man and someone she worked with in the past. Seeing two LGBT people, or two homosexual people especially, bond throughout the season and have a non-toxic friendship that held up the entire time and even up to the current day, it was and is really nice to see, and it isn't something that we see much on Big Brother at all, especially on the early seasons, where you would be lucky if there are two people on the cast that isn't straight. I also noticed that despite being in an all-girls alliance for the most part, Ivette was also able to form very strong bonds with men, like Beau, of course, Eric, and James, which is something that a lot of the women didn't really have on the season. In a way, she definitely did look feminine, just based on her clothing and the way she did her makeup and stuff like that, but you could argue that her more loud, more aggressive behavior could be interpreted as a bit more masculine. So the next person in discussion is Jenn from Big Brother 14. It is beyond pathetic that the second lesbian to be on Big Brother was on Big Brother 14. Let me break this down. This is over a decade after the show started, 8 seasons after the last time a lesbian was on the show, and 7 years after the last lesbian was on the show. During this time, or this gap, we have had several gay men on the show, and it relates the common theme in media about when homosexuality is portrayed. It is usually men instead of women, and even with transgender issues or portrayals, they usually show M to F trans people and neglects F to M trans people in media. There is clearly There's clearly an issue with the lack of representation regarding women in the LGBT community in reality TV, especially. Now it is time to actually talk about Jenn, and I do remember there was a point in time where Danielle felt a bit awkward being around her, since the former never met a lesbian in her life before this, and before Jenn, and it was definitely a moment where Jenn was able to express herself. Due to the coach's twist, the newbies really did not have a lot pertaining their own mind thoughts or opinions, but I do think there was an element of people who were intimidated by her, especially regarding her looks. She is a very tall, more imposing, and a physically strong woman, who is also a Hispanic Caribbean Latina. It's interesting that the first two lesbian women were Hispanic Caribbean Latinas, with a lot of tattoos that she had, and is very interested in rock music. But when it came to the actual game, Jenn was very passive, just spoke to a lot of people, and wasn't strong in competitions, so that intimidation factor decreased over time. There was definitely an element of her being quote unquote one of the guys, as she was heavily associated with Frank and Mike Boogie, and even kind of latched onto Dan in her final few weeks of the season. So the next person on the list is Vanessa from Big Brother 17. Luckily, it didn't take too long for there to be another lesbian on Big Brother, but it is still a very consistent thing for there to be a gay man on every season, and that not being the case for gay women, as she was 3 seasons and 3 years after Jenn. Now that I think about it, I don't know how much her sexuality really played a part in her journey on the season, but I think the Big Brother 17 cast was in general very open, and I think Audrey being the first transgender person to be on Big Brother caused them to be a lot more open to other identities in comparison to other seasons. I do remember Vanessa freaking out about her girlfriend when the feed started, but she was like this the entire time. I do notice that with lesbians on media, especially on reality TV, they are either portrayed as hard and emotionless or they are very emotionally vulnerable and kind of an emotional mess. I think if I remember correctly, Vanessa was married to a man a few years before this season started, and she was kind of coming more to terms with her own lesbian sexuality at around this point in time. So I found that interesting, or at least from what she described to people on the season, mainly the feeds. When it comes to masculinity and femininity, I think she is kind of in between, to be honest. Just by looking at her outfits, she definitely had a more masculine way of appearance, as she wore a lot of baggy clothes, wore beanies consistently, always wore long pants, and definitely had a tomboy-like appearance. But I do remember her spending a lot of time doing makeup, her hair, and caring a lot about her appearance. She was not as girly as a lot of the women on the season, who were in particular very girly and feminine, and she really was the first lesbian who was a competition beast, as she won a bunch of different type of competitions, and I don't know if people were or were not shocked by this based on her appearance. In general, I really don't have a whole lot to say about her when it comes to her sexuality on the show, despite her being the standout player and personality on Big Brother 17. So the next person on the season is Tiffany from Big Brother 18. So I do have quite a bit to say about Tiffany actually, and the controversy regarding her sexuality. One, I would like to say that it is very cool that they had two sisters who were and are lesbians to be on the show, and that could have been a very intricate dynamic and experience that Big Brother should have focused a lot more on. And also props for actually casting two lesbians on the show on back-to-back seasons, and this is the first time that they've done it, though it says a lot that we had to wait a decade and a half for this to be the case. The issue is Tiffany was identified as a bisexual on the show, but it really wasn't her choice. This is probably confusing to a lot of people, so I will explain it. Tiffany on social media, based on the picture that I'm using in this part of the video, identified as a lesbian before the season and continues to identify as such, but casting and production, probably the network too, told her to identify as bisexual, hence her intro in the season, and she felt like she had to do this in order to get on the show. She even admitted this on the feeds to several people, and it's just a really bad look on not only production and the network, but the casting as well. People like Devon and Zakiya spoke about how they felt like Tiffany was identifying as bisexual for disingenuous reasons, and while I don't think their motivations were the greatest in this regard, it is unfortunate that they were right about this, but it was due to the higher ups. Why did they so badly want Tiffany to identify as a bisexual woman when she is a lesbian? Did they, meaning the network, production, and casting, find bisexual women to be more marketable than lesbian women? Tiffany is the fourth lesbian to be on the show, but forcing her to identify as a bisexual would have made her the fourth quote unquote bisexual woman, or technically the fifth woman who likes more than one gender, including Natalie from this season. So that statistic would have lent more towards that side. I also remember Josiah stating that Tiffany told him that she was gay like he, and he felt like she was using that for disingenuous reasons, or she was claiming that false identity as a way to bond with him, and he thinks that she was faking it. And honestly, this just caused a really nasty rhetoric and a really nasty situation that could have easily been avoidable had they just let Tiffany be herself. But it just shows how much they control identity on the show, even down to someone's sexual identity. And if they feel like that person could be marketed towards more than one sexuality, or if they could be marketed towards men and women. I think all of this shows some of the issues pertaining casting with LGBT women, where they favor B women, B meaning bisexual, over L meaning lesbian women. And even just looking at the list of bisexual women and lesbian women on Big Brother, there's a lot more that's kind of leaning towards the bisexual women, but I'll talk about that when it gets to bisexual women. Anyways, some people felt like she was identifying as a bisexual woman for gameplay purposes so she could flirt with the women and the men, which didn't even happen, and she did show some elements of the quote-unquote emotional lesbian stereotype, as she was dealing with the backlash of being compared to her sister, who just dominated the prior season, and being isolated because a lot of the house guests in general just did not like her much at all. So she got emotional a lot and was kind of gaslit into it as well. The next lesbian to be on Big Brother is Kaycee, which was 2 years after Tiffany, so somewhat progress, I guess, with the consistency. Kaycee is the first lesbian woman to win Big Brother in general, and this is a huge accomplishment. When it comes to her sexuality, or if it played a part in her experience, I do think people immediately expected her to be like quote unquote one of the boys, in the fact that she was a professional athlete, wears a lot of masculine clothing, and hides her long hair under a very tight bun that might come off as wanting to appear more gender neutral, and having a lot of visible tattoos. Despite this, I would not call Kaycee being a quote unquote one of the guys type of lesbian. Kaycee gets along with the women and men, so she was not really stuck to being quote unquote one of the guys, though her social capital mainly stuck with people who are in her alliance, with the exception of Bailey, where they had a flirty relationship in the beginning, but I'll most likely get into that when I talk about Bailey. She reminded me of Jenn in the fact that despite having a more tougher or more masculine appearance, quote unquote, they in general had a very calm demeanor that are overall just very unthreatening. They did show a segment on the show about Kaycee talking about coming out to her family, and while it was easier for her father to accept, it was a bit more challenging for her mother to accept, but it was a slower process. Now that I'm thinking about it, a lot of these moments are not shown with LGBT people in general on Big Brother, especially after the first era, and even more especially with the women, as we didn't get that from either Russo sister, though I'm sure they talked about it on the feeds. In general, there's really not much to say about Kaycee in this regard, or much to say about her in general. So we're moving on to the next season with Christie from Big Brother 21. I would like to say that I am impressed that they did cast 2 lesbians in a consecutive season yet again, year, which is something that hasn't been done much at all. Christie is, now that I'm thinking about it, is most likely the most feminine, quote unquote, or girly, quote unquote, lesbian to have ever been cast. Since she did like wearing some of her feminine clothing, it didn't really have much of an appearance that suggested any sort of masculinity. Despite coming off as more feminine, she was immediately seen as one of the strongest women in the house, and this was before she became HOH. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know how much her being a lesbian really played a part in her journey in Big Brother. But it is weird that I think a lot of the men gained more respect for her or didn't demean her intelligence compared to most of the women in the house that season because they weren't attracted to her or didn't see her as a romantic option. She most definitely wasn't one of the guys type of lesbian woman, and I don't know if she was one of the girls either, or just heavily girly girl with some of the women. So she's kind of in between in that lens. Christie did have some traits that might be considered quote unquote masculine, depending on the person. One of them is that she is an immediate leader, as she was always suggesting ideas, strategizing with anyone she can, used her huge personality to her advantage, and was not afraid to let her thoughts be known, where a lot of the women tend to shrink amongst men due to the inherent sexism that plays into a lot of the dynamics in most, if not every, Big Brother season. You could argue that she was also very aggressive since she got into a lot of drama throughout the season, and her alpha personality caused her to roar when she needed to, especially during her fight with the men, and she had to fight her butt off when she was consistently nominated from the jury portion, and she was not submissive at all. At the same time, she definitely could fit under the quote unquote emotional lesbian trope, since there were many times where she cried like nothing, she had a lot of rants, and had many meltdowns throughout the season, as she was just extremely paranoid and oftentimes for no reason, which definitely got on people's nerves. So we skip 3 years and 3 seasons later, where we have our next lesbian in Nicole from Big Brother 24. I really do not have much to say about Nicole compared to the other lesbians to have been a part of Big Brother history. Just from her appearance, it is clear that she is physically strong and fit, and with her being taller, she gave off a different perception regarding her confidence, which may come off as more quote unquote masculine depending on the person. At the same time, she did dress in clothing that was a bit more feminine, and while she herself wasn't feminine, she kind of told the lines with femininity and masculinity regarding her wardrobe, appearance, and how she styled herself. Some could say that it was odd that she was one of the two women who were not included in the first Women's Alliance initially, and some might claim that it was due to her being a lesbian and all the other women are straight. But honestly, I just think it was mainly because she was so glued to Danielle during that first week, especially in the HOH room. Nicole was included around the second week of the season, but as her journey went on, Nicole started being seen as a lot more aggressive, and while she pushed her agenda very hard against Monty and Cal, and she had some drama with Taylor, I did find it interesting that she was considered aggressive, but other women who were just as messy, just as paranoid, and got into just as much drama on the season weren't given that label either. And the final person in this video is Izzy from Big Brother 25. I don't think I have a whole lot to say about Izzy in this regard. She was very open about being a lesbian, and based on her appearance, i.e. her hairstyle and more, I don't think it's particularly masculine, but it's in general just a lot more general neutral clothing. And it's clear that she's going to be seen differently than a lot of the women on Big Brother. I do think that a lot of her insecurities that her sexuality has potentially given her came through in the season, especially her relationship with men, her relationships with men. She was condescending with a lot of them, blatantly rude, thought the worst of them, kept on mentioning that she was being demeaned, bossed around, and they were aggressive with them, even when that wasn't really the case, and she had a very high horse regarding a lot of the men. Her feud with Cameron really caused her to go home, and she didn't even bother to fake the funk with Cam or Red, and she pushed Hassam away for really no reason but her insecurities, and she was the one out of everyone in that group who refused to take any sort of accountability. What was noticeable to me is that Izzy is one of the lesbian women who tends to have really strong relationships with women and finds it a lot easier to form alliances with and just to trust them in general. So that was something that stood out to me more about her. Like many other lesbians that have been cast in Big Brother, Izzy is extremely emotional, which we saw with her consistent freakouts, borderline meltdowns, and ability to make rash and poor decisions based on whatever emotion she is feeling at the time. So, this is very interesting. So, I'm looking at the amount of lesbians that have been cast on Big Brother, and there are 8 of them, which is a very small sample size, and 6 of them out of that 8 came in with the last decade. So, for a long time, there was only 1 or 2, which is just really horrible. Compared to the amount of gay men who have been on Big Brother, which is 25, you can definitely tell that the number is a whole lot smaller in comparison. If I were to do the math, there are actually 23 gay men overall, but because Marcellus and Kevin returned, I counted their separate returns as a separate representation, so that is why it moved up to 25. I just did the math, and the amount of lesbian women based on the amount of appearances that anyone who is gay or lesbian has been on. So in total, it is 33. So 8 divided by 33 is 0.24, meaning that lesbian women make up 24% of the homosexual representation on Big Brother, and that obviously means that gay men represent 76% of that representation of homosexuals in Big Brother. And that representation is so horribly lopsided, and they need to make it a lot more even. Now, pertaining the women who were on Big Brother and who are lesbians, the statistics are very interesting. So, Ivette, the first one, obviously made it to second place. Jenn from Big Brother 14 made it to fifth place. Vanessa made it to third place. So, the first 3 immediately made it to the end game. And as we all know, end game is from the final 6 onwards. Tiffany, unfortunately, did not have that luck where she was a pre-juror, but we moved on to Kaycee, who won her season, and Christie, who managed to get 6th. But the 2 more recent representations in Nicole and Izzy are all pre-jurors. So what I find interesting about this is that 5 out of 8 of the women managed to make it to the end game, and if I were to do the math for that, it means that 63% of the women who are lesbians who have been on Big Brother make it to the end game, where of course the other 3 would be 38% who didn't make it to the end game, and 38% of them did become pre-jurors. What is interesting is that none of them got to the jury portion, so pretty much these are jurors who are out before the end game, so 11th to 7th on some seasons, or 9th to 7th on some seasons. No lesbian ever got out during that mid portion of the season. But at the same time, because the sample size is so small, I don't know if that really holds much water. Since if there was about 23 to 25 lesbian appearances on Big Brother, like the gay men, I'm pretty sure a decent amount of them would fit in that juror section as well. So, looking at the women and their particular journeys, Ivette got into a strong alliance that ran most of the season, which caused her to go to the very end of the season, and she was definitely a contributing member of that alliance. Vanessa was also in a dominant alliance that controlled pretty much the entire season, and she was the leader of that alliance, which is why she was able to make it to the end. Christie was also in a dominant alliance for at least the first half of the season, but it did crumble. But instead of going out early, once that power structure dismantled, she was able to be in an underdog position and fought her way through the next several weeks where she was able to snag a spot in the end game. Kaycee was in a dominant alliance, but she really wasn't leading anything, and she was kind of just following orders. What she did do in the last third of the season was start winning competitions where she made the safe move, but that safe move got her, or those safe moves got her to the end. With Jenn, she really wasn't in many alliances at all. She just had a few relationships with people individually, and she was essentially a coaster, which is why she was able to make it to the end game. So that is how all the experiences really came into play strategically as to how they made it to the end game. Now regarding the three pre-Jenners, Tiffany was in a majority alliance, but her position in that alliance crumbled within a week, and she was immediately targeted to be sent out the door, where she was on the block for the remaining 3 weeks of the season, and she only made it through her last week due to people keeping her around to piss off Frank. But once that served its purpose, she was sent out the door. Nicole was someone who was on the out in the first week and managed to get into the majority alliance just based on sheer luck, but she played a part in destroying it, and once the power structure flipped around, she was essentially a dead woman walking. And Izzy was very similar to Christie in the way that she was in the majority alliance, they had several alliances, and they're in a power position. But once the power structure flipped, Izzy suffered because they decided to send her home instead of keeping her around. And even if she did make it through that week over Felicia and the power was taken from them, I don't see her making an underdog run or lasting several weeks like Christie did. So that is how their experiences within the game, on the strategic and the competitive end and all that, placed into their placement as either a pre-drawer or an end gamer. So now it is time to conclude the video, and honestly it is really such a shame that there's such a small sample size pertaining the lesbians that have been on the show, especially compared to the gay men who have been on the show, where this video is approximately half the length of the video about gay men due to all of this, and I really wish I had more to delve into, to analyze, and to break down regarding lesbians on Big Brother. But just based on the sample size compared to the gay sample size, it does show some inherent biases when it comes to the casting of the show, where if they want gay representation or homosexual representation, they're going to go with the men over the women more often than not, and probably because these network executives and the casting agents are most likely men, or a majority of them are men, they aren't as familiar with women, or they aren't familiar with casting a diverse set of women, and this plays into part of their sexuality as well. Or they find it harder to stereotype gay women or homosexual women, so they just go with the homosexual men, who are quote-unquote easier to stereotype. So, I am going to make the next video in this series about bisexual people in Big Brother, but I don't know if I'm going to split it up where I do bisexual women in one video or bisexual men in another video, since I don't know how the sample size of both of those is going to compare. But I do think they put a bit more focus, and by then I mean the network and the casting team put a bit more focus on bisexual women instead of lesbian women, and that is going to be a dichotomy that I'm going to delve into, especially in the next video. So I'm most likely going to combine those into one with the women and the men, and depending on the amount of gay men, gay women, bisexual men, and bisexual women in Big Brother Canada, for some of these next few videos, like the bisexual woman, the bisexual men, the transgender or non-binary people, I might combine people from US and Canada into those videos. So it all just depends on the amount of people that are there. But yeah, thank you all for following me on this journey. I was able to get this done in a day, like the day after I posted my video on the LGBT experience with gay people on Big Brother. And I'm definitely looking forward to making more of these videos. Thank you all, and I wish you all the best in whatever you do. And you can like, subscribe, all that jazz. This is Lala saying peace.